Arjun had just turned 19 when he moved back into the house his father once called home. After years of living with his maternal grandparents, the sudden death of his father left him with no choice but to live with Mira, the woman he barely knew but who was now legally his stepmother. Their connection was distant at best. Fragments of polite greetings from short visits, occasional birthday calls. Now they were under the same roof, carrying grief in different forms, trying to adapt to an unfamiliar life. Mira was 38, composed, quiet and reserved. She had spent the last few years nursing a failing marriage, and now she walked silently through her days, keeping herself busy with chores and lists. She wasn't unkind, just emotionally sealed. The house echoed with absence, of a husband, of a son, of joy. Arjun sensed it immediately. Every room seemed to hold a memory she wasn't ready to share. And he, with his duffel bag and unfinished grief, became a silent addition to that void. The first few days were cold but civil. Meals were cooked and shared with short exchanges. "How was your day?" "Fine." "Need anything?" No, they rarely looked each other in the eye. Arjun kept his headphones on and Mira kept to her room. But even in the silence, something fragile lingered. A subtle acknowledgement of loss that neither could put into words. One evening, as Arjun came home drenched from unexpected rain, Mira handed him a towel without a word. He mumbled thanks and she gave a small nod. It was mundane, unremarkable. But it was the first time he saw something different in her eyes. Not sorrow but a quiet softness. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something else. As days turned to weeks, a rhythm began to form. Arjun started waking up earlier, helping with breakfast, setting the table. Mira didn't ask, but she noticed. Her comments were small. "You've cut the fruit better than I do." But they mattered. Arjun, unused to domestic life, found a strange peace in the routine. He wasn't happy, but he wasn't drowning anymore. They started sharing tea on the porch in the evenings. No long talks. Just silence and the occasional comment about the weather or the neighborhood. But the silence was different now. Less awkward, more comforting. Mira would glance at him occasionally, and Arjun noticed how tired she looked when she thought no one was watching. It wasn't closeness. Not yet. But something had shifted. The air between them had changed. They were still two strangers sharing space, but now they were also two souls slowly recognizing each other's pain. And that recognition, however unspoken, was the first thread of a bond they didn't yet understand. Arjun began settling into the house as weeks passed, his presence no longer feeling like an intrusion. He picked up small habits. Watering the plants Mira never touched, cleaning up after dinner without being asked, replacing broken bulbs. Mira started to notice. She didn't say much, but her expressions softened. There was no dramatic shift, just the quiet accumulation of little moments. When she made tea, she made an extra cup without asking. When she folded laundry, his shirts were folded with care. One afternoon, while organizing a dusty bookshelf, Arjun found an old photo of his father, younger and smiling. He brought it to Mira, unsure if it was the right thing to do. She took it with a pause, sat down, and for the first time in days really looked at Arjun. "He wasn't always the man you remember," she said. That evening they talked more than they ever had. Not about love or feelings, but about the man who had once connected their lives. Arjun listened carefully, learning stories he'd never heard. Mira talked slowly, choosing her words as if peeling back layers she had long kept hidden. Their conversations became a habit, usually at night, sometimes over leftover food or during dull television shows. Arjun talked about college, his frustrations, the uncertainty he felt. Mira offered advice, not motherly, not intrusive, just honest and calm. He started feeling lighter around her, and she no longer carried herself like a shadow in the house. One evening during a power cut, they sat across each other in candlelight. The silence wasn't empty, it was warm. Mira opened up about how lonely she'd felt since her husband's death. She admitted how difficult it was to feel useful anymore. Arjun, moved by her honesty, reached for her hand. It was an instinctive gesture. No hidden motive, just the need to offer comfort. Mira didn't pull away. Their hands stayed locked in silence for a few seconds, a gesture that said everything they couldn't put into words. Arjun became more attentive after that. Not in a romantic way, but in a deeply considerate one. He began to anticipate her moods, noticed when she skipped meals or looked tired. Mira, in turn, started making his favorite dishes, waiting for him to return from college even if she never said it aloud. There was care now without explanation. Something intimate had formed, bound by empathy rather than expectation. Neither of them spoke about the shift, but they both felt it. When their fingers brushed while passing a plate, when their eyes met during quiet meals, there was a pause. An awareness. Not inappropriate but undeniable. They were filling voids in each other's lives, not as family, not as lovers, but as two people who had no one else to lean on. The closeness began to feel heavier. Arjun, once comforted by Mira's presence, found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around. Her laughter, rare but sincere, lingered in his mind longer than it should have. He tried to dismiss the thoughts, telling himself it was just the comfort of familiarity. But late at night, lying awake, he knew it was more than that. It wasn't desire in the usual sense. It was a strange ache, something deeper, quieter, something he didn't want to admit. He kept his distance for a few days. Spent more time in the city, returned late, avoided eye contact. Mira noticed the shift but didn't question it. Instead, she retreated too, falling back into the silent routine they once shared. The air was different again, tense, thoughtful, unresolved. When they did speak, the conversations were shorter. There were no arguments, just space. One afternoon, while folding his laundry, Mira found a book he'd left half-read. She flipped through it and found a note inside, a sentence underlined in ink. Sometimes the heart needs what the mind rejects. She read it twice, then closed the book gently. That night, she barely spoke during dinner. Something had changed in her too. Mira started spending more time outside, tending to the plants, sweeping the porch twice a day, distracting herself. But inside, she was battling the same questions Arjun was avoiding. It wasn't wrong, they weren't related by blood. They hadn't crossed any boundaries. But still, it felt complicated. She tried to label it as affection, maternal instinct, the loneliness of shared grief. But deep down, she knew the truth had no easy name. Arjun came home one night and found her asleep on the couch, a soft film still playing on the TV. He covered her with a blanket and stared at her for a moment longer than he should have. She looked peaceful, fragile. He turned away quickly, ashamed of the warmth rising in his chest. It scared him, how natural it felt to care for her like this. Days passed in this quiet confusion. Their conversations became cautious. Every word measured, every glance held too long or avoided altogether. They were aware of each other in a new way, not just emotionally but physically. Mira started noticing how tall he'd become, how his voice had deepened. Arjun noticed the way she brushed her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. Nothing was said but everything was felt. When Mira's old friend stopped by and casually mentioned how mature Arjun had become, her tone hinted at something unspoken. Mira laughed it off, but the comment lingered. That night, she stood in front of her mirror longer than usual, questioning herself. Meanwhile, Arjun lay in bed replaying every moment, every accidental touch, every silence. What existed between them was never planned. It wasn't dramatic or reckless. It was quiet, complex, and entirely real. A bond that neither dared name, afraid of what it might reveal about them both. Arjun made the decision quietly. He applied for a college hostel and got the approval within days. He didn't tell Mira until everything was confirmed. When he finally did, she only nodded and asked when he would leave. There was no resistance, no questions, just silence that carried more weight than any argument could have. She understood without needing an explanation. Distance had become necessary. The night before he left, they sat across from each other at the dining table, barely touching their food. Arjun finally said, "You've done more for me than I deserved." Mira looked at him, eyes steady, and replied, "You gave me something to care about again." That was all. No promises, no confessions. Just two people acknowledging the impact they had on each other, however complicated it had become. When the day came, Mira helped him pack. She folded his clothes carefully, the same way she always did, and placed them in his bag. At the door, she didn't hug him. She didn't cry. But her hand lingered on his shoulder a moment longer than usual. Arjun didn't say goodbye. He just looked at her and she understood. In the months that followed, their contact reduced to occasional calls and short visits. Arjun focused on his studies, built new friendships, but often caught himself thinking about her. Not with longing, but with a deep, unresolved tenderness. Mira, on her part, returned to her routines. She read more, joined a local library, and kept herself busy. Sometimes she'd make tea for two, then drink both cups in silence. She began journaling again. In one entry she wrote, "There are some people who enter our lives not to stay, but to awaken something we forgot we needed." It wasn't sadness she felt when she thought of Arjun. It was gratitude. He had reminded her she was still alive, still capable of feeling deeply, still human. When Arjun visited during a short holiday, the house felt different. Lighter. He noticed that Mira had changed the curtains, moved some furniture. She looked happier. They spoke for hours, laughing about small things, updating each other on life. It was comfortable now, free from tension. Whatever had once lingered between them had softened into something warm but distant. On his way out, Mira handed him a book she thought he'd like. Inside was a note: "Take care of your heart. It's more powerful than you realize." Arjun smiled, tucked it into his bag and walked away without looking back. Years later, when he thought about her, he didn't think of forbidden emotions or unspoken boundaries. He thought of healing. Of unexpected connection. Of a time when both of them, broken in different ways, had held each other together without ever saying the words. Some stories aren't about endings. They're about the people who help us begin again.